these results. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Devotional service is so potent that one who renders devotional service can receive whatever he likes as a benediction from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The conditioned souls are very much attached to the material world, and thus, by performing religious rites, they want the material benefits known as dharma and artha. There's no purport, so we'll go on to the next verse. Text 61. If one is very serious about liberation, he must stick to the process of transcendental loving service, engaging 24 hours a day in the highest stage of ecstasy. And he must certainly be aloof from all activities of sense gratification. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There are different stages of perfection according to different persons' objectives. Generally, people are karmis, for they engage in activities of sense gratification. Above the karmis are the jnanis, who are trying to become liberated from material entanglement. Yogis are still more advanced because they meditate on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And above all these are the devotees who simply engage in transcendental loving service to the Lord. They are situated seriously on the topmost platform of ecstasy. Here, Dhruva Maharaj advised that if he has no desire for sense gratification, then he should directly engage himself in the transcendental loving service to the Lord. The path of apavarga, or liberation, begins from the stage called moksha. In this verse, the word vimuktaye for liberation is especially mentioned. If one wants to, it's a misspelling. If one wants to be happy within this material world, he may aspire to go to the different material planetary systems where there is a higher standard of sense gratification. One second. I want to start. Okay. Then he may aspire to go to the different material planetary systems where there is a higher standard of sense gratification. But real moksha, or liberation, is performed without any such desire. This is explained in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by the term anya vilasita sunyam, without desire for material sense gratification. For persons who are still inclined to enjoy material life in different stages or in different planets, the stage of liberation is bhakti yoga. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. For persons who are still inclined to enjoy material life in different stages or in different planets, the stage of liberation in bhakti yoga is not recommended. Oh, they still want sense gratification. Okay. Only persons who are completely free from contamination of sense gratification can execute bhakti yoga, or the process of devotional service, very purely. The activities on the path of Apavarga up to the stage of Dharma, Artha, and Kama are meant for each sense gratification. But when one comes to the stage of moksha, the impersonalist liberation, the practitioner wants to merge into the existence of the Supreme. But that is also sense gratification. When one goes above the stage of liberation, however, he at once becomes one of the associates of the Lord to render transcendental loving service. That is technically called vimukti. For this specific vimukti, liberation, Narada Muni recommends that one directly engage himself in devotional service. Okay, very good. Text 62. When Dhruva Maharaja, the son of the king, was thus advised by the great sage Narada, he circumambulated Narada, his spiritual master, and ordered him respectful obeisances. I'm sorry. And offered him, it says respectful obeisances. Where do you have proper?
No. He said ordered. You may have misread that. Yeah, that's fine. Offered him respectful obeisance.
And offered him respectful obeisances. Then he started for Madhuvana, which is always imprinted with the lotus footprints of Lord Krishna, and which is therefore especially auspicious. Oh, Madhuvana is one of the spiritual uh, forests. Uh, okay. Text 63. After Dhruva entered Madhuvana forest to execute devotional service, the great sage Narada thought it wise to go to the king to see how he was faring within the within the palace. When Narada Muni approached, the king received him properly, offering him due obeisances. After being seated comfortably, Narada began to speak.
We did cover some of these words.
Okay.
It's 68. We didn't get.
Which 68?
Yeah, but that's fine. We can read through it.
Yeah. The great sage Narada inquired, "My dear king, your face appears to be withering up, and you look like you have been thinking of something for a very long time. Why is that? Have you been hampered in following your path of religious rites, economic development, and sense gratification?" Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The four stages of advancement of human civilization are religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and for some, the stage of liberation. Narada Muni did not inquire from the king about his liberation, but only regarding the state management, which is meant for advancement of the three principles: religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification. Since those who engage in such activities are not interested in liberation, Narada did not inquire from the king about this. Liberation is meant for persons who have lost all interest in religious rituals, ceremonies, economic development, and sense gratification. Text 65. The king replied, "Oh, best of the Brahmanas, I am very much addicted to my wife, and I am so fallen that I have abandoned all merciful behavior, even to my son, who is only 5 years old. I have banished him and his mother, even though he is a great soul and a great devotee." Wow. That's pretty mean thing to do. In the purport, in this verse, there are some specific words which are to be understood very carefully. The king said that since he was very much addicted to his wife, he had lost all his mercy. This is the result of becoming too affectionate toward women. The king had two wives. The first wife was Suniti, and the second Suruchi. He was too attached to the second wife, however, so he could not behave well with Dhruva Maharaj. That was the cause of Dhruva's leaving home to perform austerities. Although, as a father, the king was affectionate toward his son, he minimized his affection for Dhruva Maharaj because he was too much addicted to the second wife. Now he was repenting that both Dhruva Maharaj and his mother Suniti were practically banished. Dhruva Maharaj went to the forest, and since his mother was being neglected by the king, she was therefore almost banished also. The king repented, having banished his boy, for Dhruva was only 5 years old, and a father should not banish his wife and children or neglect their maintenance. Yeah, anyway, this is proof that you should only have one wife, because when you have several wives and children with the different wives, you're going to eventually be, let's say, attached to one more than the other, and this is going to cause problems. Repentant over his neglect of both Suniti and her son, he was morose, and his face appeared withered. According to Manusumrita, one should never desert his wife and children. In a case where the wife and children are disobedient and do not follow the principles of home life, they are sometimes given up. But in the case of Dhruva Maharaj, this was not applicable because Dhruva was very mannerly and obedient. Moreover, he was a great devotee. Such a person is never to be neglected. Yet the king was obliged to banish him because he was too attached to the other wife. Such a person is never to be neglected. Yet the king was obliged to banish him. Now he was very sorry. You see how complicated things get when you have more than one wife. That's why it's recommended only to have one wife. But obviously, previously, men were having more than one wife. Now, the Muslims today legally can have four wives, and they have problems also because of that. There was one devotee. I think maybe I spoke about this before. He had two wives. He used to come walking to the temple holding hands with both wives. He was really very, puffed up. And one day he came to the temple, but he was alone. But then the devotees saw that the two wives were holding hands, and they had banished the devotee, and they became lesbians. So you see everything in Krishna consciousness. Okay, so text 66. My dear Brahmana, the face of my son was just like a lotus flower. I am thinking of his precarious condition. He is unprotected, and he might be very hungry. He might have lain down somewhere in the forest, and the wolves might have attacked him to eat his body. Oh my God. Text 67. Alas, just see how I was conquered by my wife. Okay, he's got several wives. So one of his wives, he was more attached to one of his wives than the other. And he's saying now, just see how I was conquered by my wife. Just imagine my cruelty. Out of love and affection, the boy was trying to get up on my lap, but I did not receive him, nor did I even pat him for a moment. Just imagine how hard-hearted I am. Well, you're hard-hearted because you're too attached to that one wife. But buddy, you have several wives, and you have children with the different wives, and actually now you're feeling sorry because you didn't properly take care of your son, Dhruva. The great sage Narada replied, my dear king, please do not be aggrieved about your son. He is well protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although you have no actual information of his influence. His reputation is already spread all over the world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes when we hear that great sages and devotees go to the forest and engage themselves in devotional service or meditation, we become surprised. How can one live in the forest and not be taken care of by anyone? But the answer, given by great authority, given by a great authority, Narada Muni, is that such persons are well protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Saranagati, or surrender, means acceptance or firm belief that wherever the surrendered soul lives is always protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is never alone or unprotected. Here it is, my dear devotees, just a major statement here. Dhruva Maharaj's affectionate father thought his young boy, only 5 years old, to be in a very precarious position in the jungle. But Narada Muni assured him, you do not have sufficient information about the influence of your son. Anyone who engages in devotional service anywhere within the universe is never unprotected. Jai Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Well, that is a major statement, and we should take it to heart. Text 69. My dear king, your son is very competent. He will perform activities which would he impart?
Which would be.
Oh yeah, see, it's that's nonsense. All these mistakes. Uh, all right, I'll use this one here. Okay, my dear king, your son is very competent. He will perform activities which would be impossible. So this is should be which would be impossible even for great kings and sages. Very soon, he will complete his task of coming back home. You should know that he will also spread your reputation all over the world. Well, it's a good son. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Here in this verse, Narada Muni has described Dhruva Maharaj as Prabhu. The word is applicable to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sometimes the spiritual master is addressed as Prabhupada. Prabhu means the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, now we know what Prabhu means. And Pada means post. According to Vaishnavas, or Vaishnava philosophy, the spiritual master occupies the post of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Or, in other words, he is the bona fide representative of the Supreme Lord. Dhruva Maharaj is also described here as Prabhu because he is an acharya of the Vaishnava school. Another meaning of Prabhu is master of the senses. Just like the word Swami, another significant word is Suduskaram, very difficult to platform, very difficult to perform, very difficult to perform. What was the task that Dhruva Maharaj undertook? The most difficult task in life, wow, there it is to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Dhruva Maharaj would be able to do that. We must remember that Dhruva Maharaj was not fickle, meaning having a mind that's always changing. He was determined to execute his service and then come back. Come back where? Go back to Godhead. Mm-hmm. Every devotee, therefore, should be determined that in this life, he will be able to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and by that process, go back home, back to Godhead. That is the perfection of the highest mission of life. Okay, well, thank you for that. Text 70. Maitreya Vacha. So Maitreya said, the great Maitreya continued, the king, Uttanapada, after being advised by Narada Muni, practically gave up all duties in relation with his kingdom, which was very vast and wide, opulent like the goddess of fortune. And he simply began to think of his son, Dhruva. Text 71. Elsewhere, Dhruva Maharaja, having arrived at Madhuvana, took his bath in the river Yamuna and observed fasting in the night with great care and attention. After that, as advised by the great sage Narada, he engaged himself in worshiping the Supreme Personality of God. The significance of this particular verse is that Dhruva Maharaja acted exactly according to the advice of his spiritual master. The great sage Narada, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, also advises that if we want to be successful in our attempt to go back to Godhead, we must very seriously act according to the instruction of the spiritual master. That is the way of perfection. There need be no anxiety over attaining perfection, because if one follows the instruction given by the spiritual master, he is sure to attain perfection. Our only concern should be how to execute the order of the spiritual master. A spiritual master is expert in giving special instructions to each of his disciples. And if the disciple executes the order of the spiritual master, that is the way of his perfection. Okay, very nice purport. Text 72. For the first month, Dhruva Maharaj ate only fruits and berries on every third day, only to keep his body and soul together. And in this way, he progressed in his worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Kapitaha is a flower which is known in Indian vernacular as kayeta. We do not find an English equivalent for the name of this flower, but its fruit is generally not accepted by human beings. It is eaten by monkeys in the forest. Dhruva Maharaj, however, accepted such fruits, not for luxurious feasting, but just to keep the body and soul together. The body needs food, but a devotee should not accept foodstuff to satisfy the tongue and sense gratification. It is recommended in Bhagavad Gita that one should accept as much food as necessary to keep the body fit. But one should not eat for luxury. Dhruva Maharaj is an acharya, and by undergoing severe austerities and penances, he teaches us how one should execute devotional service. We must carefully know the process of Dhruva Maharaja's service. How severely he passed his days will be shown in later verses. We should always remember that to become a bona fide devotee of the Lord, it is not an easy task. But in this age, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, it has been made very easy. But if we do not follow even the liberal instructions of Lord Chaitanya, how can we expect to discharge our regular duties in devotional service? It is not possible in this age to follow Dhruva Maharaja in his austerity, but the principles must be followed. We should not disregard the regulative principles given by our spiritual master, for they make it easier for the conditioned soul. As far as our ISKCON movement is concerned, we simply ask that one observe the 4 prohibitive rules. Chant 16 rounds, and instead of indulging in luxurious eating for the tongue, simply accept prasada offered to the Lord. This does not mean that with our fasting, the Lord should also fast. The Lord should be given foodstuff which is as nice as possible, but we should not make it a point to satisfy our own tongues. As far as possible, we should accept simple foodstuff just to keep the body and soul together to execute devotional service. It is our duty to remember always that in comparison to Dhruva Maharaja, we are insignificant. We cannot do anything like what Dhruva Maharaja did for self-realization because we are absolutely incompetent to execute such service. But by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, we have been given all concessions possible for this age. So at last, we should always remember that neglect of our prescribed duties in devotional service will not make us successful in the mission we have undertaken. It is our duty to follow in the footsteps of Dhruva Maharaj, where he was very determined. We should also be determined to finish our duties in executing devotional service in this life. We should not wait for another life to finish our job. Okay, so let's finish everything up in this lifetime. Text 73. In the second month, Dhruva ate only every 6 days, and for his eatables he took dry grass and leaves. Thus he continued his worship. This eliminates everyone, and that's only the second month. Text 74. In the third month, he drank water only every 9 days. Thus he remained completely entranced and worshiped the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is adored by selected verses. Text 75. In the fourth month, Dhruva Maharaj became a complete master of the breathing exercise, and thus he inhaled air only every 12th day. Okay, so this eliminates everybody. In this way, he became completely fixed in his position and worshiped the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And don't forget, Dhruva was only 5 years old. Text 76. By the fifth month, Dhruva Maharaja, the son of the king, had controlled his breathing so perfectly that he was able to stand on only one leg, just as a column stands, without motion, and concentrate his mind fully on the Para Brahman. This is severe meditation. Text 77. He completely controlled his senses and other objects, and in this way, he fixed his mind without diversion to anything else upon the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The purport. The yogic principles of meditation are clearly explained here. One has to fix one's mind upon the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead without diversion to any other objective. It is not that one can meditate or concentrate on an impersonal objective. To try to do so is simply a waste of time, for it is unnecessarily troublesome, as explained in Bhagavad Gita. Text 78. When Dhruva Maharaj was thus captured, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the refuge of the total material creation, and who is the master of all living entities, the three worlds began to tremble. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, the particular word Brahma is very significant. Brahman refers to one who not only is the greatest, but has the potency to expand to an unlimited extent. How was it possible for Dhruva Maharaj to capture Brahman within his heart? This question has been very nicely answered by Jiva Goswami. He says that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the origin of Brahman, for since he comprises everything material and spiritual, there cannot be anything greater than he. In the Bhagavad Gita, also, the Supreme Godhead says, I am the resting place of Brahman. Many persons, especially the Mayavadi philosophers, consider Brahman the biggest, all-expanding substance. But according to this verse and other Vedic literatures, such as Bhagavad Gita, the resting place of Brahman is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, just as the resting place of the sunshine is the sun globe. Srila Jiva Goswami therefore says that since the transcendental form of the Lord is the seed of all greatness, he is the Supreme Brahman. Since the Supreme Brahman was situated in the heart of Dhruva Maharaj, he became heavier than the heaviest, and therefore everything trembled in all the three worlds. In, in the spiritual world, everything trembled in all the three worlds and in the spiritual world. Wow. This shows you how very serious meditation can lead to one being very, very powerful. The Mahatattva. Okay, wait a minute. Purport. Continuation of this purport. Okay. The Mahatattva, or the sum total of the material creation, is to be understood to be ultimate end of all universes, including all the living entities therein. Brahman is the resort of the Mahatattva. Brahman is the resort of the Mahatattva, which includes all material and spiritual entities. It is described in this connection. Oh, I want you to look up that word resort.
Right?
Yeah, resort. In other words, that's where the Mahatattva is present.
Place that is popular destination, or like for the vacation kind of thing, or the action of turning to or adapting strategy or course of action.
Okay. Brahman is the resort of the Mahatattva, which includes all material and spiritual entities. It is described in this connection that the Supreme Brahman, the personality of Godhead, is the master of both pradhana and purusha. Pradhana means subtle matter, such as ether. Purusha means the spiritual spark, living entity, the spiritual spark, living entities who are entangled in that subtle material existence. These may also be described as para-prakriti and apara-prakriti. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, being the controller of both the prakritis, is thus the master of pradhana and purusha. In the Vedic hymns also. So pradhana is the sum total of the material nature, and purusha is the controller.
Mm.
In the Vedic hymns also, the Supreme Brahman is described as Anta Pravista Shastra. This indicates that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is controlling everything and entering into everything. The Brahma Samhita 535 further confirms this. Andantarasta paramanu chayantarastam. He has entered not only the universes, but even the atom. In Bhagavad Gita 10:42, Krishna also says, Vitista ya aham. Yeah, Visista Vyaham Idam Krishnam. The Supreme Personality Godhead controls everything by entering into everything. By associating constantly with the Supreme Personality in his heart, Dhruva Maharaj naturally became equal to the greatest Brahman, by his association, and thus became the heaviest, and the entire universe trembled. In conclusion, a person who always concentrates on the transcendental form of Krishna within his heart can very easily strike the whole world with wonder at his activities. This is the perfection of yoga performance. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 647, Yoginam api sarve sam, of all yogis, the bhakti yogi who thinks of Krishna always within his heart and engages in his loving transcendental service is the topmost. Ordinary yogis can exhibit wonderful material activities known as astasiddhi, 8 kinds of yogic perfection. But a pure devotee of the Lord can surpass these perfections by performing activities which can make the whole universe tremble. Text 79. As Dhruva Maharaja, the king's son, kept himself steadily standing on one leg, the pressure of his big toe pushed down half the earth, just as an elephant being carried on a boat rocks the boat left and right with his every step. And now don't forget, and Dhruva Maharaj is still a 5-year-old boy. And just look how powerful he has become by this severe meditational process. Purport. The most significant expression in this verse is Partivarbaka, son of the king. When Dhruva Maharaj was at home, although he was a king's son, he was prevented from getting on the lap of his father. But when he became advanced in self-realization or devotional service, and by the pressure of his toe, he could push down the whole earth. Wow. That is the difference between ordinary consciousness and Krishna consciousness. In ordinary consciousness, a king's son may be refused something even by his father. But when the same person becomes fully Krishna conscious within his heart, he can push down the earth with the pressure of his toe. Wow. I'm not going to mess around with the Dhruva Maharaj. One cannot argue. How is it that Dhruva Maharaj, who was prevented from getting up on the lap of his father, could press down the whole earth? This argument is not very much appreciated by the learned, for it is an example of Nagna Matrika logic. Wow, what is this Nagna Matrika logic? By this logic, one would think that because his mother in her childhood was naked, she should remain naked even when she is grown. I love the way Prabhupada writes. When she is grown up. The stepmother, Dhruva Maharaj, might have been thinking in a similar way, since she had refused to allow him, meaning Dhruva, to get up on the lap of his father. How could Dhruva perform such wonderful activities as pressing down the whole world, whole earth? She must have been very surprised when she learned that Dhruva Maharaj, by concentrating constantly on the Supreme Personality of Godhead within his heart, could press down the entire earth like an elephant who presses down the boat on which it is loaded. Mm. Well, let's not forget that she recommended to Dhruva to seek out Lord Krishna. Yeah. Text 80. When Dhruva Maharaj became practically one in heaviness with Lord Vishnu, the total consciousness, due to his fully concentrating and closing all the holes of his body, we have 9 holes, the total universal breathing became choked up, and all the great demigods and all the planetary systems felt suffocated, and thus took shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah, when you're scared to witless, you then think about God. And when all that is over, you forget God again. So That means that we should always be thinking about Krishna, not just because there's a calamity. Purport. When hundreds of persons are sitting in an airplane, although they remain individual units, they each share in the total force of the airplane, which runs at thousands of miles per hour. Similarly, when unit energy is identified with the service of the total energy, the unit energy becomes as powerful as the total energy. Have you ever heard that term, unit energy? It's interesting.
So I think they are saying
When one person
so in a way
becomes as powerful as the total energy. Yeah, go ahead.
in a way each individual person is also traveling at the same speed as the entire plane.
Yeah,
They're carrying a kinetic energy that is same as powerful as the total energy of the plane in this case.
okay,
So
that's a good explanation. As explained in the previous verse, Dhruva Maharaja, because of his spiritual advancement, became almost a total heaviness, and thus he pressed down the whole earth. Moreover, by such spiritual power, his unit body became the total body of the universe. Thus, when he closed the holes of his unit body to firmly concentrate his mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all the units of the universe, namely all the living entities, including the big demigods, felt the pressure of suffocation, as if their breathing were being choked. Therefore, they all took shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead because they were perplexed as to what had happened. This just shows you the unbelievable power of a young boy who's determined. This example of Dhruva Maharaj is closing the holes of his personal body, and thereby, and now we have 9 holes in the body, and thereby closing the breathing holes of the total universe, clearly indicates that a devotee, by his personal devotional service, can influence all the people of the whole world to become devotees of the Lord. If there is only one pure devotee in pure Krishna consciousness, he can change the total consciousness of the world into Krishna consciousness. This is
like Prabhupada himself.
like Prabhupada, yes. This is not very difficult to understand if we study the behavior of Dhruva Maharaj.
So he became himself, his own body became representative of the entire earth.
Representative of what?
His energy, like what he was doing to his body, was happening to the entire earth.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, he was very determined. And this is because he wants to be able to get back on the on his father's lap. Just imagine how powerful he is. He's more powerful than anyone. And he's closing the holes of his personal body, and thereby closing the breathing holes of the total universe, clearly indicates that a devotee, by his personal devotional service, can influence all the people of the whole world to become devotees of the Lord. Like you said, that's an example of Prabhupada. If there is only one pure devotee in pure Krishna consciousness, he can change the total consciousness of the world into Krishna consciousness. This is not very difficult to understand if we study the behavior of Dhruva Maharaj. Well, also Srila Prabhupada. Text 81. The demigod said, "Dear Lord, you are the refuge of all moving and non-moving living entities. We feel all living entities to be suffocating. Their breathing process is choked up. We have never experienced such a thing. Since you are the ultimate shelter of all surrendered souls, we have therefore approached you. Kindly save us from this danger." Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Dhruva Maharaj's influence, attained by executing devotional service unto the Lord, was felt even by the demigods, who had never before experienced such a situation. Because of Dhruva Maharaj's controlling his breathing, the entire universal breathing process was choked. It is by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that material entities cannot breathe, whereas spiritual entities are able to breathe. I'm going to read that again. It is by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that material entities cannot breathe, whereas spiritual entities are able to breathe. Material entities are products of the Lord's external energy, whereas spiritual entities are products of the Lord's internal energy. The demigods approach the Supreme Personality Godhead, who is the controller of both kinds of entities, in order to know why their breathing was choked. The Supreme Lord is the ultimate goal for the solution to all problems within this material world. In the spiritual world, there are no problems, but the material world is always problematic. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of both the material and spiritual worlds, it is better to approach him in all problematic situations. Those who are devotees, therefore, have no problems in this material world. Vishwam Purna Sukhayate Chaitanya Charitamrita. Devotees are free from all problems because they are fully surrendered unto the Supreme Personality Godhead. For a devotee, everything in the world is very pleasing because he knows how to use everything in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. That's a real devotee. Neophyte devotees don't know how to use everything in the service of the Lord. But a very advanced devotee knows how to use everything. And this was something that was asked of Srila Prabhupada. And they said, well, Prabhupada, you say that, a devotee can use everything in the world.
What about atom bomb?
Right, yes. So they said, what about an atom bomb? And Prabhupada said, yes, we can use that to kill the demons. Text 82. The Supreme Personality of Godhead replied, my dear demigods, do not be perturbed by this. It is due to the severe austerity and full determination of the son of King Uttanapada, who is now fully absorbed in thought of me. He has obstructed the universal breathing process. You can safely return to your respective homes. I shall stop this boy in his severe acts of austerities, and you will be saved from this situation. Well, whenever the demigods are in trouble, guess what they do?
They escalate.
They go and start praying to Krishna. Please help us. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Here, one word. Sagat Atma
Sangata.
or Sangatma is misinterpreted by the Mayavadi philosophers who say that the self of Dhruva Maharaja became one with the Supreme Self, the personality goddess. See, they always want to, equate the ordinary human being with God.
Mhm.
The Mayavadi philosophers want to prove by this word that the supersoul and the individual soul become united in this way, and that after such unification, the individual soul has no separate existence. But here it is clearly stated by the Supreme Lord that Dhruva Maharaja was so absorbed in meditation on the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that he himself, the universal consciousness, was attracted to Dhruva. Let me read that again. But here it is clearly said by the Supreme Lord that Dhruva Maharaja was so absorbed in meditation on the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that he himself, the universal consciousness, was attracted to Dhruva.
Yeah, basically the Lord himself was attracted to Dhruva.
Okay. In order to please the demigods, he wanted to go himself to Dhruva Maharaj to stop him from the severe austerity. The Mayavadi philosopher's conclusion that the super soul and the individual soul become united is not supported by this statement. Rather, the super soul, the personality of Godhead, wanted to stop Dhruva Maharaj from this severe austerity. By pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one pleases everyone, just as by watering the root of a tree, one satisfies every branch, twig, and leaf of the tree. If one can attract the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one naturally attracts the whole universe because Krishna is the supreme cause of the universe. All the demigods were afraid of being totally vanquished by suffocation. But the personality of Godhead assured them that Dhruva Maharaj was a great devotee of the Lord and was not about to annihilate everyone in the universe. A devotee is never envious of other living entities. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the fourth canto, eighth chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Dhruva Maharaja leaves home for the forest. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. So we'll stop right there. And tomorrow, in chapter 9, we'll hear Dhruva Maharaja returns home. Haribol. Any questions anyone would like to ask?
Any questions online?
Okay, our takeaway today is from text 82, the last verse that we just read. It says, here, one word, Sangat Atma,
Sangata.
is misrepresented by the Mayavadi philosophers who say that the self of Dhruva Maharaj became one with the Supreme Self, the personality of Godhead. That, of course, is a false statement by the Mayavadis. The Mayavadi philosophers want to prove by this word that the super soul and the individual soul become united in this way, and that after such unification, the individual soul has no separate existence. This, of course, is a false narrative. But here it is clearly said by the Supreme Lord that Dhruva Maharaja was so absorbed in meditation on the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that he himself, the universal consciousness, was attracted to Dhruva. In order to please the demigods, he wanted to go himself to Dhruva Maharaj to stop him from the severe austerity. In other words, The individuality of the living entity is eternal, whereas the Mayavadis believe that all individuality is Maya, and there's only one supreme eternal called Brahman. So they want to collapse everything into oneness. But here it's clearly said, even in the most, let's say, extraordinary show of consciousness, the individuality of living entity is never annihilated. It's always existent. So this absolute oneness of the Mayavadis is rejected by this pastime of Dhruva Maharaj. Okay, so I think we'll stop there and continue tomorrow, unless there are any questions or comments.
So the intense sadhana that Dhruva Maharaj performed,
Yeah.
is not something that we devotees do, right? Which is
Wow.
obviously is meditating on the Lord, but with such an intensity that he completely overcame his physical, bodily needs.
But you can attain the same, let's say, intense meditation by chanting Hare Krishna.
So that's
sincerely, yeah.
So like Haridas Thakur,
Yes.
in a way, he probably would have done the same. I mean, even though he didn't,
Of
but he's
course.
chanting like 22 hours, 23 hours of the day.
23 and a half.
23 and a half. Wow.
Yeah, his mind is fully focused on the Lord. Yes. So that doesn't mean he died. He didn't starve himself to death. I mean, I'm talking about Haridas Thakur. But he was able to have a life in which he was not at all attracted by Maya. In fact, Maya tried to make him fall down. Maya Devi herself, not just that very pretty girl who was hired by the demon to make Haridas Thakur fall down. He passed 2 times the severe test, and both times he did not give up his Krishna consciousness by being attracted to Maya Devi. So that means that he was in samadhi. But he didn't have to do all these difficult things. He was in samadhi by dint of always chanting Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. Please chant Hare Krishna and be happy. And think about what we're reading. Look at it a little bit more during the day today. And especially our takeaway is the false narrative of the Mayavadis. What is that? It says, here in one word, Sangatatma is misinterpreted by the Mayavadi philosophers who say that the self of Dhruva Maharaj became one with the Supreme Self, the personality of Godhead. The Mayavadi philosophers want to prove by this word that the super soul and the individual soul become united in this way, and that after such unification, the individual soul has no separate existence. But here it is clearly said by the Supreme Lord that Dhruva Maharaja was so absorbed in meditation on the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that he himself, the universal consciousness, was attracted to Dhruva. In order to please the demigods, he wanted to go himself to Dhruva Maharaj to stop him from the severe austerity. The Mayavadi philosophers' conclusion that the supersoul and the individual soul become one, united, is not supported by this statement. Rather, the supersoul, the personality of Godhead, wanted to stop Dhruva Maharaj from the severe austerity. So this universal oneness that the Mayavadis are trying to attain is not possible, because that would mean that everybody loses their individuality and everything becomes one. That is a false narrative. Everything is one and different eternally. Not everything is one. Okay. Well, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we came to the end of that chapter, and now we're starting a new chapter. Look how Prabhupada spent so much time writing all these purports. Amazing.
Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't be able to understand exactly how others are
We wouldn't
misleading us.
understand anything. All we would understand is, how there was a sex.